In downtown Dallas, President Kennedy was shot today just as his motorcade left downtown Dallas. Mrs. Kennedy jumped up and grabbed Mr. Kennedy. She cried, "Oh no." The motorcade sped on. A photographer said he saw blood on the president's head. It was believed 2 shots were fired. Keep tuned to your NBC station for the later news.
Bill, if I may suggest this, you and Chet have been so busy bringing the bulletin information to the audience. Of course, a great many people are not aware of the earlier details of the story, and radio and television sets have been going on all around the country. So I wonder if for their benefit as well as for mine, I'm getting in on it late, if you could reconstruct what we know from the top in chronological order, insofar as you have those details.
Well, basically, Frank, of course, the president was on this 2-day trip to Texas, making a series of speeches. It was said that one of his missions in Texas was to try and coalesce the divergent wings of the Democratic Party. He had made a speech in Fort Worth, Texas, which is, I think, about 25 or 30 miles from Dallas. He then moved to Dallas and was about to make a speech, was on his way to another site of a speech in Dallas, or just on the fringes of the city.
This was a motorcade?
It was a motorcade, and it was moving with, as has been reported, the bubble top of the presidential car down. This may have been a tragic mistake. But all we know is that at roughly 12:45 or so, the shots were fired.
Central Standard Time?
I think it would have been Dallas time. Yes, it would have been Dallas time. It has happened within the past
20 minutes.
Yes, within the past 20 minutes or so. The president was headed for another speech, and the motorcade was moving along on this freeway, going under a ramp of another freeway when the attack took place.
Put Mr. McNeil on, please.
This is Robin McNeil, our correspondent, who has been traveling with the president.
Bob, are you there? This is Frank McGee. Bob, I'm in 5HN. We are on the air. You take it from the top, Bob, and tell us everything that you know, if you would, please, in chronological order. Starting at the very top, unless you have some late information on the president's condition. You speak slowly, and I'll repeat what you say. All right, this is Robert McNeil reporting from Dallas. Now, please go ahead, Bob. Bob is at the hospital in Dallas, where the president has been rushed. The president is seriously wounded. This information comes from Texas Senator Ralph Yarborough, who was with the president. The shots which wounded the president occurred as the motorcade was running through huge crowds in downtown Dallas. The governor of Texas, John Connally, was also hit. The Texas governor was sitting on the far side of the car, across from the president. Mrs. Kennedy, who was seated between them, was not wounded. The shots apparently came from a window in a building overlooking the parade route. But about one street back from it, shielded by some trees. There were a lot of Negro people around, but the man seen in the window was a white man. What kind of gun was it, Bob? Was it a rifle? A policeman has told Bob that the policeman heard that it was a high-powered rifle, but there's been no confirmation of that. Just a moment, Bob. Please stand by.
Hold on to Bob. I think we have a gadget here, Frank, that...
Put the receiver on that, Frank, and apparently it will function as a speaker. And let Bob talk.
Bob, I'm told that this little thing I've just attached to the telephone... Bob, could you say a few words for us? You're still there.
About the president's condition.
Now, is this being broadcast, what is saying there now?
That's right.
I see.
Yeah.
Bob, I'll tell you what, I realize that you're in a terrible position. You cannot get information as long as you're on the phone, but do you think you would be better advised to remain on the phone or to break the connection and get back in touch with us? Your judgment.
I think I would be better advised.
Yes, Bob. This is being heard, what he is saying.
Yes, Frank.
Over this microphone here.
What's your job, what?
I have a... Hello?
Yes, Bob.
I have a medical student here. We're going to hold this line open for me.
All right.
And if you'll just chat with him or ask somebody else to chat with him until I come back in about 5 minutes.
That's fine, Bob. We'll be expecting you, and I'll keep the phone and be talking with the student. We'll know when you come back. Thank you, Bob, very much.
Frank, to interrupt for a moment, there is this from Dallas. While Robin McNeil is on the phone, of course, he is unable to gather information. President Kennedy has been given blood transfusions at Parkland Hospital in an effort to save his life after he and Governor John Connally of Texas were shot in an assassination attempt. The word still is that the president is in very serious condition. Other reports say he is in critical condition. Governor John Connally, I think, Chet, has been moved, has he not?
Yes, we have this information which adds up to something rather inconclusive. It says the Secret Service said the president remained in the emergency room and the governor was moved to the general operating room of Parkland Hospital. One Secret Service man was overheard telling another that there was no need to move the president because emergency facilities were entirely adequate in the emergency room. That would indicate, just sort of a snap judgment evaluation, that Governor Connally was worse wounded than the president. But as I say, that is only a snap judgment evaluation.
Or it could mean, Chet, that they are separating the two cases so that each can be given full attention.
Right.
The medical student who is on the line with me says he can see outside a window and that a sizable crowd has gathered outside the hospital.
We are going to switch to station WBAP-TV, Fort Worth, Dallas, and to newsman Charles Murphy.
Well, that's all right.
There is no definite word yet that the person who fired the shots at President Kennedy and Governor Connally in Dallas has been apprehended. We have just received this report, though. Moments ago, authorities took a young man into custody. They took him to the county sheriff's office near the Triple Overpass, near where the shooting occurred. The man was neatly dressed. He's in his early 20s. He is protesting vehemently his innocence, and he says that he has witnesses to prove that he is innocent. 2 Roman Catholic priests have been summoned to the emergency room where the president is. A White House spokesman said someone had asked for the priest, but did not say whom. Blood transfusions have been administered to President Kennedy. Governor Connally has been moved to the general operating room.
Now for Washington reaction to this tragic story, we go to NBC News Washington and David Brinkley.
Bill, there isn't a great deal as yet because obviously the news has just got here. It was taken to Congress, which of course recessed immediately to wait to see what has happened. We've checked with the White House, which has told us it doesn't know any more than we know, and in fact has been listening to us to see what it could find out.
Now we are returning to Dallas, Fort Worth, to station WBAP-TV and newsman Tom Whalen.
Hang on.
This is Tom Whalen in Fort Worth. WBAP newsman James Darnell in Dallas on the scene of the presidential shooting, the shooting in which President Kennedy and Governor Connally were shot, has an eyewitness interview with a Mrs. Jean Hill. Here is the interview.
What is your name, ma'am?
Jean Hill.
From Dallas?
That's right.
And did you see the shooting, miss?
Yes, sir.
Can you describe what happened?
Yes, sir.
Will you do that now?
They were driving along, and we were the only people in this area on our side, and the shots came from directly across the street from us. And just as the president's car became directly even with us, we took one look at him, and he was sitting there. He and Jackie were looking at a dog that was in the middle of the seat, and about that time 2 shots rang out just as he looked up. Just as the president looked up, and these 2 shots rang out, and he grabbed his chest, and it looked like he was in pain, and he fell over in the seat, and Jackie fell over on him and said, "My God, he's been shot." And after that, more shots rang out, and the car sped away.
Now, what kind of a car was that?
What kind of a car was it? The president.
I mean, where did the shots come from?
The shots came from the hill.
From the hill?
Yes. It was just east of the underpass.
And
we were on the south side.
Did you look up there where the shots came from, ma'am?
Yes, sir.
Could you see anyone?
I thought I saw this man running, but I looked at the president, and for a while, and I looked up there, and I thought I saw a man running, and so right after that, I guess I didn't have any better sense. I started running up there too.
And what is your name?
Jean Hill.
G-E-A-N?
J-E-A-N.
J-E-A-N. What's your address, Miss Hill?
9402 Bluff Creek.
9402 Bluff.
That was an interview I had with Mrs. Jean Hill of Dallas a few minutes ago. A short time later, Dallas sheriff's officers took a young man into custody. It's believed that they also took a rifle at the same time, described as a .30-30 rifle, which was supposedly found near the scene, although this has not been confirmed. And as we reported earlier, both Governor Connally and President Kennedy are in the emergency room. That is, the president is now. Governor Connally was moved to another room in the hospital. A Catholic priest was called to the emergency room a short time ago, and the president's condition is described as very critical. Representative Albert Thomas of Houston said both men were alive, however.
Vice President Lyndon Johnson, who was with the president, walked into the hospital. Bob, let me interrupt. Was he in the same car? All right, please, go ahead. Walked into the hospital, holding his own arm. Just a moment, Bob. I'm going to interrupt for a bulletin that the Associated Press has moved from Dallas. Mrs. Lyndon Johnson said after a visit... Yes, please go ahead then, Bob. Who just emerged from the area where the president has been taken, said that her husband, the vice president, is fine. Bob is telling me that the latest he knows at the moment is that the president's condition is serious and uncertain. That
for how many times?
We do not know exactly where he was struck nor how many times.
But he was carried into the hospital. Unconscious and bleeding. And last rites of the church have just been administered. That's all for the moment, Frank.
And Bob tells me that's all for the moment. Bob?
Yeah.
If you can make the thing arrangement.
There's this additional detail from the hospital. An assistant to Governor Connally said he talked to the governor in the hospital operating room. He said the governor was shot just below the shoulder blade in the back. The assistant, Bill Stinson, said he asked the governor how it happened, and he said, I don't know. I guess from the back they got the president, too. These are quotes from Governor John Connally, who was also wounded. There are additional reports that the governor's aide asked the governor if there was anything he could do, and all the governor said was just take care of Nellie for me. That is Governor Connally's wife. She was uninjured. Also, Mrs. Kennedy was not injured. As Robert McNeil reported, the last rites of the Roman Catholic Church have been administered to the president, but this in no way indicates that it is expected that he will lose his life.
In just this momentary lull, I would assume that the memory of every person listening at this moment has flashed back to that day in April 1945 when Franklin Delano Roosevelt...
Excuse me, Chet. Here is a flash from the Associated Press, Dateline Dallas. 2 priests who were with President Kennedy say he is dead of bullet wounds. There is no further confirmation, but this is what we have on a flash basis from the Associated Press. 2 priests in Dallas who were with President Kennedy say he is dead of bullet wounds. There is no further confirmation. This is the only word we have indicating that the president may, in fact, have lost his life. It has just moved on the Associated Press wires from Dallas. The 2 priests were called to the hospital to administer the last rites of the Roman Catholic Church, and it is from them we get the word that the president has died, that the bullet wounds inflicted on him as he rode in a motorcade through downtown Dallas have been fatal. We would remind you there is no official confirmation of this from any source as yet.
Bill, just moments before you brought the flash, I had word from the hospital that the Vice President, Lyndon Johnson, and his wife had just left the hospital, then rushed away into a motorcade and departed.
This, Frank, might be confirmation of the flash.
We must stand by for confirmation, as Bill has emphasized.
From 2 sources. Again, it is not...
Bill, excuse me. We have NBC's Bob McNeil on the line now with a report. Please go ahead, Bob. White House Press Secretary Malcolm Kilduff has just announced that President Kennedy died at approximately 1 o'clock Central Standard Time, which is about 35 minutes ago.
After being shot at.
After being shot.
By an unknown assailant.
By an unknown assailant.
During a motorcade drive through downtown Dallas.
During a motorcade drive through downtown Dallas.
The president died.
The president died.
Approximately 25 minutes.
Approximately 25 minutes.
After the attack took place.
After the attack took place.
He had been rushed, bleeding and unconscious.
He had been rushed, bleeding and unconscious.
To the Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas.
To the Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas.
And was given blood transfusions.
And was given blood transfusions.
About 15 minutes ago.
About 15 minutes ago, reports NBC's Bob McNeil from Dallas, to whom I'm talking now.
A priest emerged.
A priest emerged.
After having given the president.
After having given the president.
The last rites.
The last rites.
The shooting came.
The shooting came.
According to witnesses.
According to witnesses.
From the second floor.
From the second floor.
Of a building called the Texas School Book Depository.
Called the Texas School Book Depository.
Which is about 100 yards.
Which is about 100 yards.
From the tree-lined parkway.
From the tree-lined parkway.
On which the president was driving when the shooting occurred.
On which the president was driving when the shooting occurred.
3 shots were heard.
3 shots were heard.
Frank, that's about all I can tell you at the moment.
Bob, thank you very much. We'll keep the line open.
Okay, we'll keep the line open.
That was a report from NBC's Robert McNeil at the hospital in Dallas, Texas, confirming by way of word from the White House press secretary that President Kennedy is dead.
The death, according to Malcolm Kilduff, who was acting as the president's secretary on this trip, came roughly 39 minutes ago at about 1 o'clock Dallas time. There is further word that Vice President Lyndon Johnson was taken from the hospital and he was not wounded. He has been taken from the hospital off to a secluded place. He will assume the constitutional duties, succeeding now the late John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the former president, the late president of the United States.
The next in line for the presidency then, after Mr. Johnson, becomes John McCormick of Massachusetts, Representative John McCormick of Massachusetts, who is the Speaker of the Speaker of the House. He is, as I say, next in line. We were told a few minutes ago the Air Force had 4 jet airplanes on the ramp at nearby Andrews Air Force Base, ready to take off for Texas, and perhaps by this moment they have. I don't know. Presumably to bring Mr. Johnson and other members of the party back here, and or to take some of the members of Mr. Kennedy's family to Texas. Here is a late report. Cabinet members of Mr. Kennedy's cabinet, that is Secretary of State Dean Rusk, the Secretary of Interior Stuart Udall, and others, but I'm relying on memory. I don't remember who else was there, were on their way to Japan as a part of a mission to discuss trade with the Japanese and other matters. They were 1 hour out of Hawaii. They have turned back to the United States. We don't know yet if they're coming to Washington or Dallas, but I would assume Washington. There isn't much they could do in Dallas. Pierre Salinger is with them. The Kennedy children's Bob Goralski, who is at the White House, NBC's reporter there, says the Kennedy children are still there, and it's a normal school day for them, for Caroline and her classmates. We are now told that the president was shot once in the head. Governor Connolly of Texas was hit both in the head and the wrist, we are told. The police have found a rifle of some foreign make. We don't know what make, nor do we know exactly who had it, but we are told again, as we've reported earlier, that a young man was picked up at the scene and is being questioned. We don't know who he is.
Here's one other little bit of information. The priests came out of the ward at approximately 1:37 p.m. Central Standard Time. The announcement by the 2 priests brought audible sobs from a crowd of scores of newsmen and other citizens crowded around the emergency ward entrance of the hospital. Senator Ralph Yarborough of Texas, talking only a few minutes before to the newsmen, collapsed in sobs as he told of witnessing the slaying of the president. Yarborough said he was in the 3rd car behind the president. It seemed to him, he said, that at least 2 of the shots came from the right rear. He said he couldn't say anything about the 3rd shot. So, that is the story. The President of the United States is dead. The new president is President Lyndon Johnson. The memories of, I suppose, all of us are flashing back to that warm April spring day of 1945 when we lost the wartime President Franklin D. Roosevelt. For many of us, this is the second time around that we have been through one of these crises. The last shooting incident, not fatal, involving a president occurred in 1950 when President Harry S. Truman was in office and was living in Blair House in Washington. The White House was being renovated at that time. You may recall that two Puerto Rican nationalists tried to gun their way into Blair House and assassinate President Truman, who was taking a nap at the time on the second floor.
Yes, Bob, I understand that they're clearing the room, so would you give us a report on what you can see from there now?
Well, President Kennedy's body, Frank,
President Kennedy's body
is in the emergency section.
Oh, I'm sorry, Bob. I understand you can be heard directly now, so go right ahead with a straight report.
President Kennedy's body is in the emergency section of this hospital at the end of a long corridor. For the past 45 minutes, the corridor has been filled with bewildered-looking White House officials, hospital interns, reporters. Now police are clearing out the entire corridor, and we believe that the president's body is about to be brought out. A bronze coffin was taken in about 15 minutes ago, and that was shortly after White House Press Secretary Malcolm Kilduff had officially announced that the president died at 1 o'clock Dallas time, that is 2 o'clock New York time, after the shooting incident in downtown Dallas.
Bob, thank you very much. Does this mean you will have to leave this telephone?
I can hold on for a second here, Frank, I think.
Well, please do.
I'll hang on as long as I can.
Yes, as long as you can. And that's the word from Dallas, Bill, at this time.
Thank you very much, Frank. Merrill Muller, I think you have some additional detail here.
The flag at the White House has just been lowered to half-mast. We also have two eyewitness reports on the wire services. One eyewitness reporter, a television reporter named Mal Couch, said that he saw a gun emerging from the window of a warehouse. This warehouse was located just beyond a triple underpass through which the presidential motorcade had to go on its way into downtown Dallas. And just as the car emerged from the presidential car emerged from this underpass, 3 shots rang out. 3, not 2. We know that Mr. Kennedy was hit in the right temple and that Governor Connally was hit in the head and wrist. That's all we know at the moment on Governor Connally. We do not have a late report on his condition. As you know, the president died just about an hour ago from his wounds. This is the first assassination of a president of the United States since William McKinley, I think, in 19...
Well, here's something on Governor Connally. He's reporting in satisfactory condition.
This is just in, as Bill just told you, Governor Connally is in satisfactory condition. We have no report on the condition of Mrs. Kennedy. She is in the hospital still. Traveling behind a police escort with his wife, Lady Bird Johnson. She is now the first lady of the land since Mr. Johnson has become president of the United States. Lady Bird Johnson has been under heavy guard and is in seclusion somewhere in downtown Dallas.
Actually, Merrill, excuse me, do you have information? This is not information. Well, I was just going to say that President Kennedy is the third American president to be assassinated since Lincoln. The others were James Garfield in 1881 and William McKinley in 1901. And as a matter of fact, this continues one of, I suppose you'd have to call it one of the grimmest statistics in American history. No president in the last 100 years who has taken office in the 0 year has completed his term of office. They've all died. What is the situation in the room where you are at the hospital now?
Well, I'm in a little small waiting room where emergency patients wait to be taken into the operating rooms where they're treated. And there are a few policemen who are the only ones left in the long corridor leading to the room with double swinging doors, behind which we assume the president's body is being placed in the bronze coffin, which was taken in about half an hour ago, and from which we expect it to come out shortly.
Bob, we have a still photograph here in the studio that has just moved, and it shows a man and a woman and what looks like 2 small children lying on the ground. I understand you saw these people.
Yes, well, they were the first people I went to. I must have got there shortly before that picture was taken, when I jumped out of the press bus, and they, in common with many other people, were screaming and lying down in the grass to escape from the shooting. The minute the shooting sound started, the air was filled with the screams of women and children, a sort of very feminine wailing filled the air, and everybody lay down on the sidewalks, on the grass, on the edge of the parkway. And I assume that the picture you're talking about is that, because nobody else I know was besides Kennedy and Governor Connolly.
We lost a part of that. You say, as far as you know, no one else.
As far as I know, no one else was hit other than President Kennedy and Governor Connolly.
And about the area or the building from which the shot apparently was fired, could you describe that for us and tell us about how far away it was from the car and how they would have been able to see the car from that distance?
Yes, well, I'll describe the scene. There was, as you come out of the main street of downtown Dallas, which was packed with people, it feeds into a parkway called the Triple Underpass. And that parkway, which is lined with trees and lawns, takes a bend. And behind some trees in the sort of service road is a brick building of about 8 stories, which is called the Texas School Book Depository. Now, according to witnesses, 2 of them who I talked to and the police talked to, say they saw a man with a gun in the, one said the 2nd floor, another one said the 4th floor, a window of that building. Now, from either floor, Frank, he would be able to see over the low trees to about 100 yards away where the president's car was.
An unobstructed view, Bob?
I would think so. I was not able to go up to either of those windows, so I couldn't see for myself, but looking at it from the ground, it looked as though it would be. The president, therefore, must have had presented either a profile to the assailant, if he was, in fact, in those windows where the witnesses say, and or his 3/4 back, because his car had actually passed the direct line from the window. You see, the way it went is the car would have approached the window head-on, then turned left and gone down a slight decline under the underpass. Just a moment, Frank.
Yes, Bob. That seems to fit, Bill, with what he said. The word that we had here was the president was struck in the right temple. Yes, Bob.
The president's body has just been carried out.
Go ahead. Say again, Bob.
The president's body has just been carried out of the hospital in the bronze casket, and it was accompanied by his military aide, Major General Clifton.
And
it has been placed in an ambulance. I understand it is being taken straight to the air base where he landed to be flown back to Washington.
I see, Bob.
The crowds have all been moved away from the door by the local police and the Secret Service. I can hear the motorcycle escort outside with the ambulance starting up. And the president's body with the police motorcycle escort is now pulling away from the hospital. It is about 1.5 hours since he was shot. The president has been dead for about 1 hour and 7 minutes. Vice President Lyndon Johnson, who is now constitutionally the president, left immediately after the president's death was confirmed, and with a police escort went off to the airport, presumably to go straight to Washington to assume the constitutional responsibilities of the president.
Bob, returning to your earlier narrative, you had just taken us to the point where the president's car had turned, and I was about to ask.
Now, there were 3 cars behind him with Secret Service and several Texas congressmen, and then I was in the first press bus, the front of the first press bus, which came behind those. And just as we turned the corner, about 40 feet behind the president's car, I heard 3 shots.
Now, Bob, was the president seated or standing at that time?
The president was seated because there were very few people at that point. It was a thin crowd at that exact point. Most of the crowd had been concentrated a few hundred yards back. The president was seated, Mrs. Kennedy was seated, but when I heard shots, I saw people fall to the ground and was not looking for the moment at the president. The car immediately disappeared under the underpass and speeded up to go straight to the hospital. And I left the press bus and went to this building from which the shots reportedly came.
Mm-hmm. What sort of a building is it, Bob?
Well, it is I told you the title. It's the Texas School Book Depository. It's a orangey brick building of about 8 floors, and it was showing an expanse to the street of maybe about 8 windows wide in the front.
Well, Bob, from the point where they think the man with the gun might have been seen to where the president was actually felled, would it have been possible for him to have been struck by a bullet in the right temple? That's his
I believe that if he was using a high-powered rifle with a telescopic sight, one policeman told me he understood it was a high-powered rifle. I don't know about the telescopic sight. I assume that from that distance it could be.
I see.
Could be.
About how fast was the president's motorcade going at the time
quite
of the
slowly.
firing?
It was about, by that time, having just gone around the corner, it was probably between 15 and 20 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm. And Vice President Lyndon Johnson was how far behind?
I'm not sure, Frank,
I see.
which car. There was a jumble of congressmen in the car immediately behind, and I'm not sure which car Vice President Johnson was in.
And then you say, of course, that the motorcade speeded up immediately and rushed toward the hospital.
Disappeared under the underpass, and I had jumped out by that time and was running with the police. They thought the assailant had fled over some railroad tracks, and they chased him through what they thought was the assailant, through several trains. Standing on the tracks, and I went with them, and therefore didn't see the president immediately as he went under the underpass.
Well, did they apprehend this person they were chasing?
No, they apprehended nobody at that time. They went back and started talking to witnesses on the scene.
Here's an additional report on what you heard NBC correspondent Bob Abernathy describe a few minutes ago, the building in which the sniper had hidden. It's the Texas School Depository at the intersection of Elm and Houston Street in Dallas. Dallas Crime Laboratory Lieutenant J.C. Day went to the building a short time after the shooting took place, and he walked out with a British .303 rifle. The rifle has a telescopic sight. Now, the rifle was found on the 6th floor of the building near a corner window. Also, police searching that area found 3 empty .303 cartridge cases, also scraps of chicken, as if a person could have been there for some time. There were boxes of books, textbooks, and other school materials stacked up all around on 3 sides of a sniper's nest, as if he had been there for some time. There was a gun rest made of papers near the open window that commanded the site from which the sniper, by which the presidential motorcade passed when the president and Governor Connally was shot.
The Secret Service, which is charged with protecting the president, physically protecting him, is a plainclothes civilian arm of the United States Treasury, which is just next door to the White House, to the left of the picture you're seeing. They are the husky, muscular young men you see in the news pictures. When the president's motorcade is moving at slow speed in a street or a parade, they usually walk along or run along beside it. They are aware that it is impossible. You see a crowd is gathering across the street. That's Lafayette Park, facing the front entrance to the White House. A crowd is gathered over there for no particular reason, because there is nothing anybody can do. But crowds usually do gather there in moments of crisis. That is, of course, the White House flag at half-staff, lowered as soon as the news came. The Secret Service tries to guard him as best it can, very often by keeping their own bodies in line of any weapon that may be aimed at the president. But obviously they can't cover every window or every tree or every manhole, and they rely primarily on the decency and the good sense of the American people. That, again, is NBC's live television camera on the White House lawn, looking through the iron picket fence across Pennsylvania Avenue to Lafayette Park, named for the Marquis de Lafayette, whose statue is there, and people are beginning to gather there. These are the grounds of the White House, the West Executive Wing, where the president's office is, and where a few minutes ago George Reedy, who is a close associate of Lyndon Johnson, arrived. Didn't say anything, but we assume he came to help make arrangements for the changeover of administration. We don't know specifically yet that Lyndon Johnson has been sworn in, has officially taken the oath, but whether or not he has, he soon will, and whether or not he has, he's president anyway, because that's how the Constitution spells it out.
We are now going to go to an NBC mobile unit, which is outside the NBC building here in New York, for pictures and sounds of the reaction of citizens of this city to the loss of their president. We go to NBC reporter Jeff Pond.
We're on the street outside the NBC studios in Rockefeller Center. Sir, how did you hear of the president's assassination?
Gentleman came into an office in which I was transacting business and mentioned it to us, and at the time I really wasn't able to believe it. I had to hear it myself. And unfortunately, I did very shortly afterwards.
What is your feeling now?
I'm terribly shocked and saddened by it, and I would add angered by it.
Why angered?
I think it was a horrible, senseless thing, and I hope that the rest of the country feels the same way.
Do you think that this assassination somehow reflects a climate of opinion in the country now?
I hope that it doesn't reflect a climate of opinion that is very prevalent in the country today. It certainly obviously reflects an opinion that some people hold. I hope that as an American and the other people as Americans do not generally hold this feeling.
You said some people. Who do you mean by that?
I don't feel expert enough to express an opinion, but the only evidence that I have as to who these people are these ultra-conservative groups that have been distributing literature and spreading hate in Texas and who attacked Ambassador Stevenson was about a week ago.
A little longer than that. Of course, no one knows if these people are indeed responsible.
No, certainly not.
Thank you, sir. Ma'am, what was your reaction?
I was very shocked and saddened by the president's death. I was getting some eyeglasses fitted when I first heard about it, and then I was riding on the bus when they finally told me he was dead.
Do you find it difficult to believe even now?
I really do. I really find it difficult to believe now.
The president was in Dallas, which is, of course, part of the South. Do you think that somehow his racial policies are in any way connected with this?
That's the first thing I thought of when I heard about it, yes. I thought that probably some segregationist crackpot or something, just they had it all planned out, and I really believe that his blood will be on their hands forever, yes.
Thank you. How about you, sir? Do you believe it even now?
This is the first time in my life I honestly say I'm not proud to be an American. Right now I'm serving in the armed forces and I'm just home on leave, and it's an understatement to say it was a shock. At first did not believe it, and I have trouble believing it now. I just don't think it reflects the thinking of most people. As was stated before, I think it's a small minority, and it's just an unfortunate day for the United States that this can happen. This is something that you read in history books and just never want to believe that can happen when you're living.
Oh, here barely 2 hours after Kennedy's death, Lyndon Johnson has taken the oath of office as the 37th President of the United States. So it is President Lyndon Baines Johnson, 55 years old, the new President of the United States. Now, back to New York.
There are details on the swearing-in of Lyndon B. Johnson as President of the United States. The oath was administered in Dallas at 1:38 Central Standard Time. That would be roughly an hour and 20 minutes ago, by a federal district judge, Sarah T. Hughes. President Johnson took the oath aboard the presidential plane at Love Field in Dallas as he prepared to fly to Washington to take over the presidency.
Here now are late, unedited, unscreened films of the shooting scene in Dallas. This is Main Street in Dallas. Is this moving west? This is moving west toward the fatal moment. The motorcade is traveling at about 20 to 25 miles an hour, slowly westward down Main Street in the heart of Dallas. The time, about 12:20. During the noon hour, heavy crowds from downtown offices lining the route. That looks like the school depository building on the right. I'm not sure. This is the scene of confusion. Something has happened here. The cameraman running toward the scene to the presidential car ahead of him. We caught just a blurred glance of the old school depository building from which the sniper fired the shot. This is the reaction from the crowd. All is confusion at the scene. Parkland Hospital, where the president died, in Dallas. By the time these films were shot, of course, the presidential car was already at the hospital. This is Major General Clifton, the military aide of the president, press secretary going into the hospital. These pictures. This is General Clifton.
More from Dallas now on what may be, I repeat, may be the capture of the assassin. We know this much. One man has been taken into custody. He was taken into custody in the Texas Theater in Dallas, specifically for killing a Dallas policeman. We're told this, that a check was made of the building from which the shots that killed President Kennedy were fired, and they found a rifle on the 5th floor of that building. Police then received a tip that a man suspected as the assassin had gone into the Texas Theater. 2 Dallas policemen went into the theater. They were told by an usher that a man had just come in. They spotted him. 1 policeman fired at the suspect, who returned the fire, killing the 1st policeman. There was shooting within the theater. The other policeman then arrested the suspect, who yelled, "It's all over now." He was clapped into handcuffs and taken out. We do not yet know if this is the man who fired the shot that killed President Kennedy. I am told that our station in Fort Worth, Dallas, has more late film. So for a report, we go to station WBAP-TV, Fort Worth, Dallas.
Hundreds of persons witnessed the shooting in Dallas just after the noon hour. We have films of eyewitness reports. Coming up is a statement by Charles Brand, who was on the sidewalk and saw the shooting.
Unfortunately, I was probably 15 to 20 feet away from the president when it happened.
Tell us exactly what you saw, sir.
He was coming down the street, and my 5-year-old boy and myself were by ourselves on the grass there on Commerce Street, and I asked Joe to wave to him, and Joe waved, and I waved, and the man...
That's all right, sir.
You go ahead, Charlie. As he was waving back, the shot rang out, and he slumped down in the seat, and his wife reached up toward him, and as he was slumping down, and the second shot went off, and it just knocked him down from the seat.
2 shots?
2 shots.
Did you see the man who did this?
No, sir, I did not see the man who did it. All I did was look in the man's face when he was shot there and saw that expression on his face and grab himself and slide. And the second one, whenever it went, why, I'm positive it had hit him. I hope it didn't, but I'm positive that it hit him, and he went all the way down in the car. Then they speeded up, and I didn't know what was going on, so I just grabbed the boy and fell on him in the hopes that there wasn't a maniac around. I'm sorry. I can't help you more, but I won't forget it. Yes.
Polaroid picture taken by another witness, Mary Norman of Dallas, showing the president slumped over in the car.
Just as Mary started to take the picture and the president came right even with us, 2 shots, we looked at him, and he was looking at a dog in the middle of the seat. 2 shots rang out, and he grabbed his chest, and a look of pain on his face, and fell across toward Jackie, and she fell over on him and said, "My God, he's shot." And there was an interval, and then 3 or 4 more shots rang out. By that time, the motorcade had sped away.
What prompted you to take the picture at that particular instant, ma'am?
Well, that's the only chance I had. Mine is a Polaroid, and I can only take one every 10 seconds, and it was at that time whenever I took it.
Did you know he was shot?
No, I didn't. I must have snapped it immediately when he slumped, because in the picture, that's the way she's there, and he slumped over. And
did you see, were you a witness, did you see the person who fired the...
No, I didn't see any person fire the weapon.
You only heard it?
I only heard it, and I looked up and saw a man running up this hill.
Could you tell me, you had no idea?
No, I had no idea. I had nothing to go by. I mean, I don't think it dawned on me for an instant that the president had been shot. I mean, I knew, and yet it just didn't register.
Did you get a look at the set?
No, I had taken the picture and then the shots, and I decided it was time to fall on the ground.
You did fall on the ground.
Late word just in from Dallas. Homicide Detective Lavelle told WBAP newsman James Kerr in Dallas a few minutes ago they have little doubt that 24-year-old Lee Oswald of Dallas is the man who shot and killed Dallas police officer J.D. Tippett. shortly after President Kennedy was shot to death this afternoon. Oswald was pulled screaming and shouting from the Texas Theater by officers who had gone there on a tip that Oswald was there. He brandished a pistol which officers took away from him after a struggle. Oswald was quoted as saying, "It's all over now." A large crowd had congregated around the theater, and police had to hold back the crowds because they were of the impression that the man was the president's assassin. Officer Tipper had been killed by a man answering the description of Oswald in the neighborhood a short time before. The coincidence in the case is that Oswald worked as a stockman at the Texas Book Depository, the building from which the sniper shot President Kennedy. Dallas police have declined to say whether they think Oswald is connected with the assassination.
Now, there is just one conflict between what Charles Murphy has just reported to you and what we have from the wires coming out of Dallas. The indications are in the last story we had here that the suspect had been taken into custody, Oswald, and the dead Dallas policeman engaged in a shooting affray within the Texas Theater where the suspect was ultimately taken into custody. However, Murphy reported that the killing of the policeman took place in the vicinity, that Oswald was then chased into the theater and then arrested. We do not yet know, and as Murphy pointed out, Dallas police have not yet indicated whether they feel there is a connection between this man and the assassination of President Kennedy, but Murphy did report that the man was employed as a stock clerk in the building from which the fatal shots were fired, and there was also the report that 2 years ago he said he would like to have Russian citizenship.
We are going to return you to WBAP-TV, Fort Worth, and Charles Murphy with some film that was made at the hospital where the president died. So to WBAP-TV, Fort Worth, and Charles Murphy.
Late films have arrived in our newsroom from Dallas showing the scenes of horror and disbelief outside Parkland Hospital. Newsmen hurry to the emergency room. The president's wife arrives, stunned. This is Mrs. Kennedy, in the middle. At this point, no one knew whether the president was alive or dead. Mrs. Kennedy conferring with a Dallas policeman who had sped the president to the hospital. And into the emergency room goes Mrs. Kennedy. A corsage of roses lies inside the car in which President Kennedy was shot. A stunned Congressman Jim Wright of Fort Worth tells what he saw from a few cars back. The disbelief registered on every face. These films from outside the emergency room of Parkland Hospital in Dallas as the president is dying inside. Senator Ralph Yarborough, who saw the shooting, said he heard shots and then saw a Secret Service man pound his fist against a rear fender of the presidential car in anguish. 2 priests arrived to administer last rites. Their names are not yet known. The deed still is not registered with many outside the hospital. Horror begins to sink in.
The black, ugly words are in print. President shot dead, president dead. Common headlines that will appear on every newsstand of probably every newspaper in the world tomorrow morning. But there is the possibility, and it is a possibility only, that the man who perpetrated this action may have been found. Frank?
Well, his name is Lee H. Oswald. He has been arrested in connection with the shooting of a Dallas policeman outside a theater where police had been sent on a tip that the man had gone there. There is reason to believe, according to police, that he is somehow connected with the assassination of President Kennedy. He is being described now as a prime suspect, although the actual words that he is the man who committed the crime has not as yet been used. Not a great deal is known about this Oswald. We will get more information as we go on. We do know that he has been identified by police in Dallas as chairman of an organization known as Fair Play for Cuba Committee. And a police captain, Pat Ganaway, said the suspect was an employee in the building where the rifle used in the assassination was found. And Ganaway said the suspect had visited Russia and was married to a Russian. This was not immediately confirmed. Now, according to my understanding, and Bill, you can help me with this, this is the building, a depository for books.
The Texas School Book Repository, I think it's called.
Which is located just across the parkway down which the presidential motorcade was traveling at that time. And is there not an arrow there?
The arrow, yes, Frank, should be pointing to the 5th floor window from which it is believed the fatal shots were fired.
And
there were photographers who said they saw a rifle being pulled in from the window.
And you can see the people gathered outside the building. And then the rifle itself, I believe we have a picture of it.
Yes, there should be one there of the rifle being removed from the building. There it is, variously described as a 303. Or
perhaps some of the experts could recognize it immediately, but it obviously has a telescopic sight on it. And the best we can make out now, the president's motorcade had really traveled perhaps a few yards beyond this point, and that the fatal shots that were fired from behind and struck him in the back of the head, and then incongruously, some way, another bullet struck him in the front of the neck.
One reporter, Frank, who was traveling in the motorcade, says it's his guess that the assassin had about a 45-degree angle on the president, so that it was not head-on or directly from the rear, but on the side. There's more on Oswald here, Frank.
Please, go ahead.
He came back to Fort Worth, it says here, from Russia last year after having been in the Soviet Union since 1959, where he worked in Minsk in a factory, left after he apparently became disillusioned with life under communist rule. He'd gone to Russia after he got out of the Marine Corps, announced he wanted to stay there, changed his mind, then applied for a passport in '62, saying he wanted to return to the United States with the Russian wife he met and married in the Soviet Union. They have an infant child. It is not made clear here whether or not he brought the wife and child back to this country. Yes, it is. I'm reading as quickly as I can. Passport was issued, and he and his family came to this country. And it was in 1959, after he'd gone to the Soviet Union, that Oswald told American embassy officials there that he had applied for Soviet citizenship, but apparently he never followed through on that. Again, he is only a suspect, but he is identified as a prime suspect in the assassination of President Kennedy.
As we have attempted to sort out our thoughts here as this afternoon has worn on, it occurs to us that perhaps within the last month, certainly within the last 45 days, the actual chief executive or head of government of all of the major Western allies, save France, has been changed. Britain has changed prime ministers, with Harold Macmillan retiring because of illness to be replaced by the new prime minister, Sir Alec Douglas Hume. A new government has been formed in Italy. Chancellor Konrad Adenauer is no longer the head of the West German state. He has been replaced by Chancellor Erhard. And now the assassination of the President of the United States being replaced by the Vice President, now the President, Lyndon Baines Johnson. So 4 of the 5 major Western allies have undergone a change in their head of government within, as we say, about the last 45, perhaps 30 days, leaving only General Charles de Gaulle of France, who has long since been the last active figure brought over from World War II. The plane with the President Johnson and the late President Kennedy is on its way to Washington, will arrive at Andrews Air Force Base shortly. The new president is expected to make a short statement upon arrival, and we have a report now from NBC's John Chancellor, who is in Berlin.
The news of the president's death swept across Berlin. The telephone exchange reported that it was swamped with calls and some of the equipment wouldn't work. As the news spread, people walked out into the streets on a cold and rainy night, asking one another if it was really true. In the restaurants along the Kurfürstendamm, the main street in West Berlin, customers gathered around radio and television sets. Most people watched for a while and then left their meals unfinished and just went home. At least one of the legitimate theaters in West Berlin stopped its performance in the middle, announced the tragic news, and canceled the evening's performance. A dance festival was stopped in a similar way. Mayor Willy Brandt of West Berlin asked the people of the city to put candles in their windows tomorrow night in memory of the American president who had so eloquently, and only a few months ago, pledged his affection and allegiance to this city. Mayor Brandt, who is expected to go to the United States for the funeral, said tonight that with the first citizen of the free world, Berlin has lost its best friend. Students from Berlin's Free University tonight will stage a midnight memorial march through the center of West Berlin. They will march on some of the streets traveled by the president when he visited this encircled city in June. The student march will end at the Schöneberg Rathaus, the city hall where Mr. Kennedy made his famous "I am a Berliner" speech. Tonight, on a cold and rainy night, other West Berliners mourn him.
And it is safe enough to say, certainly it can be said by those who remember the death of President Roosevelt, that this afternoon, wherever you were and whatever you might have been doing when you received the word of the death of President Kennedy, that is a moment that will be emblazoned in your memory, and you will never forget it as long as you live.
I think you're right, Frank. I can recall only one other occasion in which I underwent a similar experience. It was on a transport ship which had just docked in Saipan Harbor in April of 1945 when I learned that then President Roosevelt had died. And I think I can remember how the harbor smelled and how high the sun was and where the clouds were and everything else. And certainly today will be as indelibly dug into my mind as that morning was. It's a shocking thing, and it's just simply unbelievable. It couldn't have happened.
To Andrews Air Force Base in Washington and Robert Abernathy of NBC News.
See the great jet arriving now. Here it is. It's come here. It's the great plane, the United States of America, that is rolling up to the concourse here.
And here is the plane now. Made the flight back from Dallas. Plane coming in here at Andrews Air Force Base, just outside Washington.
The presidential jet, momentarily, the lights went out here at the Air Force Base. The hundreds of reporters couldn't see anything. Now the lights are back on. It's a bright, shiny casket glistening in the lights here at the airport.
Casket is a dark brown in color, slightly reddish. It looks as if it's bronze.
The honor guard slowly marches away from the plane, leaving room for the elevator-like apparatus that is now being lowered. Seems to have gotten stuck. The apparatus is coming down now.
A Navy ambulance is being drawn up just near the truck which lowered the casket from the plane. It is our understanding here that the body will be flown by helicopter from here, possibly to Bethesda Naval Hospital.
Other senators have reported that the body will be taken by helicopter straight to the White House. There is some difference of opinion as to the exact plans. casket is Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy. To her right is her brother-in-law, the Attorney General, Robert Kennedy. They are helping her down out of that carrier that has just brought down the casket.
Mrs. Kennedy is apparently getting into the ambulance, the Navy ambulance, with the casket.
It was a very steep step that she had to jump down to get on the floor. Aides helped her do it. She was helped also by her brother-in-law, the Attorney General, Robert Kennedy.
President Lyndon Johnson and Lady Bird Johnson are standing just near the door in the rear of the presidential jet, waiting.
Mrs. Lyndon Johnson is holding the new president's hand.
And the Navy ambulance moves off with the casket.
The ambulance is going to the other side of this airport. It is supposed to deliver the casket to the helicopters that are standing by. Former Congressman Homer Thornberry
the head of the Secret Service on the president's right. Secretary McNamara and other officials greeting the new president. As he moves now in the direction of an Army helicopter.
That was Secretary McNamara, I think, who just leaned over and affectionately kissed Mrs. Johnson. We have heard that Lyndon Johnson, the new president, was going to make a speech here tonight on arrival. The microphones are set up. He appears to be walking toward them now.
This is a sad time for all people. We have suffered a loss that cannot be weighed. For me, it is a deep personal tragedy. I know that the world shares the sorrow that Mrs. Kennedy and her family bear. I will do my best. That is all I can do. I ask for your help and God's.
One of the people who came out here was Senator Aiken, who said, "I'm just beginning to realize what happened. President Johnson needs our help."
Now the Army helicopter preparing to take off. The rotors beginning. Take off for the short flight from Andrews Air Force Base outside Washington to the south lawn of the White House in downtown Washington.
The honor guard is now disappearing from the field. Press, dignitaries, are moving away. The plane, the presidential plane, the United States of America. It bears no other insignia but that. There, the baggage is being taken off, hastily packed. Now the 55-year-old Lyndon Baines Johnson is on his way to the White House, the first time he will enter the White House as president.
Thus, the arrival in Washington, the body of the late President John F. Kennedy and President Lyndon B. Johnson. And so, events which started swiftly, completely unexpectedly and shockingly in Dallas only a matter of about 5 hours ago have gone virtually full circle. The President and the late President are, in a sense, back home, back in the nation's capital. The business of running and governing this nation will go on. Frank?
The helicopter is now on its way to the White House. This recent innovation in the United States procedures involving the chief executive is carrying the new President of the United States from Andrews Air Force Base to the White House, where he will now fill out the remainder of John F. Kennedy's term.
President Lyndon Johnson appearing at the White House for the first time. There is Mrs. Johnson and the President stepping down from the helicopter. Walking across the south lawn of the White House to the south portico, the President is now talking to his special Secret Service man. Previously, was the head of the Vice Presidential Detail. Vice President Johnson will meet with Secretary of Defense McNamara and McGeorge Bundy almost immediately. That is Secretary of Defense McNamara now talking to Mrs. Johnson. Now they walk under the south portico where they will go into conference at 8 o'clock this evening. About an hour and a half from now, President Johnson will meet with the leadership, Democrats and Republicans of the Congress. It had been reported that Mrs. Kennedy was on Air Force One, the presidential plane that carried President Johnson and the body of former President Kennedy from Dallas to Washington.
None of us will ever forget where he was and how he felt when the news was announced. In New York City, for a handful of people, the place was the sidewalk beside the open door of NBC News reporter Gabe Pressman's automobile, listening to the loudspeaker, the car radio. They had known for some minutes that the president was gravely wounded. Then came the instant when the worst was confirmed.
A flash from Dallas. 2 priests who were with President Kennedy say he is dead of bullet wounds. This is the latest information we have from Dallas. We are, of course, standing by to give you all available information as it comes to us. I will repeat with the greatest regret this flash. 2 priests who were with President Kennedy say he has died of bullet wounds.
Find it hard to believe.
From 2 sources,
the line now with the report. Please go ahead.
It's hard to believe it.
Hard to believe is right.
The president died. The president died. Approximately 25 minutes.
Others, there was a stunned silence and a groping to come to terms with a fact that was almost beyond belief. The face and voice of a young girl summed it up.
Bleeding and unconscious. The Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas. To the Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas.
What's your feeling right now?
I really couldn't say. Really, right now I just don't know what to do. I don't even know where to go, what to say. Nothing for me to say.
There is this note on how some school children found out about what happened today. High school children in one New Jersey town were told, bluntly, truthfully, exactly what had happened. Grammar school children in the same town were told only something dreadful has happened. Go straight home immediately after school. They did, and told their mother that something dreadful had happened and asked what it was. The mother turned on the radio and the family found out together exactly what it was and just how dreadful it is.
In these circumstances, I hope that I may be allowed a personal reaction, which perhaps will also be the reaction of some others. One's first feeling, of course, was that it was a dream, not real. After that came the dispiriting, hopeless feeling that it was banal, an absurdity, and that is the feeling that persists. Foreigners have been asking all day, how can you let this sort of thing happen? Well, we don't let it happen. Someone will someday have to say how a man with a high-powered rifle got into a building along the route in Dallas, but this is a country of 190 million people. Basically, it's true that if someone wants badly enough to kill the president, provided he's willing to take some risk himself, he has a very good chance of doing it. Now, we shall hear much in the next few days about the need to bind up the wounds of the nation and about the need for all Americans to stand together. We may treat those words as empty slogans or as real needs to be genuinely met. Whatever we do, there can be no guarantee that what happened today will not happen again. But what is within our power, we should do. And it is within our power to be more serious about our public life. If I may be permitted one more word, we will hear much in the next days and weeks about the continuity of our government. President Kennedy has been killed. President Johnson has taken over. The business of government goes on. We may draw some satisfaction from the fact that the business of government goes on, but it is not a cause for congratulation. It is what should be expected, even from what we Americans are tonight, a grossly diminished people.
One of the places where we have had cameras brought out and mobile units set up is in San Francisco. So for a sampling of the mood in that West Coast city, we now go to station KRON-TV in San Francisco and Jerry Jensen.
I know it happened, but I still can't believe it.
Where were you when you first learned of the death?
I work here at the Chronicle. I was at my desk.
Sir, what are your feelings?
I was shocked and almost beyond belief. I was at work when I first heard of it in Richmond, and knew somebody came into the office and mentioned something about it. It's still too much to believe. I'm very saddened by the horrible thing that happened. It's almost impossible still to comprehend a terrible disaster.
Thank you. And you, sir?
Well, I think this is something that everyone in the country shares the blame for, and I hope that everyone, especially the Southern white moderates, take every possible step they can to see that it never happens again or anything like it. I hope that the moderates, especially in the South, do everything they can to quell this type of fanaticism and stop it. This is going to destroy the South and perhaps the whole country.
Sir?
Well, sir, I worked for the Chronicle in the printing department as a machinist, and I was very saddened and shocked. Everybody I worked with was very heartfelt and sad. Mr. Kennedy, who has helped to do so much for our country, uniting for peaceful purposes and banning the bomb and civil actions that Mr. Kennedy was always for, and I feel it's a great loss to the country.
Thank you, sir. Perhaps the best reaction is best summed up: a hero is dead, and the people know it. This is Jerry Jensen reporting from San Francisco.
And I believe NBC's Bill Ryan has an interesting footnote to this story.
Yes, Frank, when you get a story as big as this one, the facilities of all the news-gathering organizations are devoted to it, and so you get a tremendous amount of information. Among the items turned up is the fact that it was a $435.71 United States government loan that enabled Lee Harvey Oswald to come back to this country 18 months ago after he'd spent 2.5 years in the Soviet Union. This is the man who was under arrest in Dallas, Texas for the murder of a Dallas policeman today, and who may have been the man who fired the shot that took President Kennedy's life. It is standard procedure for an American citizen when he is in trouble overseas in a foreign country and unable to get home to go to the United States Embassy or consulate and appeal for government funds to get him home. Apparently this is what Oswald did in the Soviet Union 18 months ago. The government gave him $435.71, and that's how he came back here.
NBC's Robert McNeil was in Dallas and was almost directly behind the president's car in the first bus of news correspondents when the president was felled by the sniper's bullet. And he is still on duty in the Dallas-Fort Worth area now, so we would like to go to WBAP-TV in Fort Worth, Dallas, and NBC's Robert McNeil.
It was one of those days that a reporter finds himself musing about when he's half asleep sometimes in a plane. Your mind drifts as you prepare for the big story. What is likely to happen at this moment and that? Sometimes your mind drifts to the most extreme thing that could happen, and you hastily dismiss it because the most extreme thing never does happen. You pull your mind back to the ordinary things that always do happen. This day began in the rain with the ordinary things for a popular president on a grassroots tour, even if it was ostensibly non-political. For a young president with politics in his blood, a refreshing contact with the source of his power, a delirious crowd outside his Fort Worth hotel. His wife, he told them, wasn't there because she was still organizing herself. It takes her longer, the president said, because she looks better than we do.
Take longer. That's because she looks better than we do.
Mrs. Kennedy did appear a little later at a Chamber of Commerce breakfast, timing her entry by waiting outside the door until all others were introduced. She appeared with thunderous applause, radiant in a pink suit and matching pillbox hat. This caused her husband to think back to a day 2.5 years ago in Paris.
Years ago, I said that introduced myself in Paris by saying that I was the man who had accompanied Mrs. Kennedy to Paris. I'm getting somewhat that same sensation as I travel around Texas.
A new Mrs. Kennedy has emerged this trip, a first lady no longer shy about the rough and tumble of politics. On arrival in Dallas from Fort Worth, she was true to her new form. She plunged ahead of the president into the ecstatic crowds. Some of them caught her glove, mauled her sleeve, even grabbed one of the roses off its stem. There were no hostile signs at the airport crowd, only eagerness for contact with the Kennedys. Then into the open limousine for the motorcade through Dallas. The president had done this thousands of times. He sat on the right, Mrs. Kennedy on the left. Everywhere the crowds were bigger than expected. Dallas authorities were jittery. Security precautions were the heaviest in the city's history. Dallas was determined that its name, smirched round the world by the attack on UN Ambassador Adlai Stevenson last month, would not be dragged through the mud again. There were heavy police forces all along the route. All possible troublemakers had been searched out and warned. All but one. The downtown streets. In the first press bus, we strained to catch any signs of the hostility the Dallas precautions had led us to expect. But all we saw was a vast and friendly crowd, but many thousands of welcome jack signs. It's approaching 12:30 p.m. Dallas time. The crowds in the tall business district are overfilling the sidewalks. Some throw streamers and torn paper in a miniature ticker tape parade. The reporters look at each other. There have been no incidents. At about 12:32, the motorcade turns a corner into a parkway. The crowds are thinner. NBC cameraman Dave Wigman, in a car ahead of us, takes a passing shot of a building, then 3 shots are heard, like toy explosions. Wigman jumps from his car, running towards the president with his camera running. People scream and lie down, grabbing their children. I leave the motorcade and run after police who appear to be chasing somebody. The motorcade moves off fast. We don't know it, but the president is mortally wounded in the head and throat. His car races for the hospital. The police find no one and return. Looking for a phone, I go into an office. It's on the ground floor of this building, the Texas School Book Depository. It is not more than 4 minutes after the shooting. Minutes after a man on the 5th floor of the same building has abandoned a high-powered rifle and fled. Waves of police move in. A small Negro boy tells them he saw a man with a rifle in a window upstairs. Witnesses come up. They saw the president hit. The motorcade reaches Parkland Memorial Hospital. It goes immediately to the emergency entrance. Bleeding profusely and unconscious, the president is lifted onto a stretcher and carried to emergency operating room number 1. Doctors say his condition is grave and moribund, that is, near death on arrival. At approximately 1 o'clock, the president is dead. The doctors were working too frantically to revive him to notice the exact moment. The press and public do not know the president is dead for another half hour. The only reports available are that he is gravely wounded. At 1:31 Central Time, White House Assistant Press Secretary Malcolm Kilduff tells the press the president is dead. The president's body, in a bronze coffin, is flown to Washington. Dallas police moved with great speed after the shooting. The story of the chase, arrest, and questioning of a suspect from NBC's Tom Pettit at police headquarters in Dallas.
In Fort Worth, 28 miles west of Dallas, police picked up one suspect who was later cleared and released. The man apprehended was identified by Fort Worth police as 22-year-old Donald House of Ranger, Texas. House was picked up after Dallas police put out a pickup order on his car following the shooting and killing of a Dallas police officer. As he was taken into police headquarters, House shouted, "I didn't do it." And after questioning, he was completely cleared and released. In Dallas, the prime suspect still is being questioned. He is 24-year-old Lee Oswald of Dallas, a former Marine who spent some time in Russia, who at one time had applied for Soviet citizenship. He has been associated with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Oswald has been charged with the murder of police officer J.D. Tippett, who had gone to apprehend Oswald, but he denies killing President Kennedy, says he is being held because he was in Russia. But Dallas Police Chief J.E. Curry says interrogation of Oswald will continue, that he is a very good suspect in the death of President Kennedy. Tom Pettit, NBC News, at Dallas Police Headquarters.
Dallas Police Chief Just Curry has recently reported that his men have found a partial fingerprint on the rifle believed used in the assassination. The weapon will be sent to Washington to ensure proper handling of the print. The city of Dallas, like the country, is still in a state of shock tonight. Texas Governor John Connally is in serious but satisfactory condition in hospital. Everyone, public officials, the police, the newspapers, have been too busy to ask the questions about loopholes in security that inevitably will be asked. As President Eisenhower said today, this is the kind of thing that freedom, compatible with democracy, makes possible. The mayor of Dallas, Earl Cabell, in a statement of the city's remorse, has said that all churches in the city will be open tonight. Dallas feels as any American city would if this had happened not here today, but there. This is Robert McNeil, NBC News, reporting.
It has all been shocking, but perhaps one element in the shock was the speed. By the Washington clock, at a little after 1 o'clock this afternoon, President Kennedy was about as alive as any human being ever gets. Young, strong, vigorous, looking forward to, no doubt, 5 more years, he hoped, of leadership in this country and of the Western world. His wife, young, beautiful, looking very happy, was beside him and seeming to be having a wonderful time and leaning across the back seat of the car to say to him, "You can't say Dallas hasn't been friendly to you." And that was a little after 1 o'clock. 5 hours later, at 6 o'clock, Mr. Kennedy had been murdered. Lyndon Johnson was President of the United States. Mrs. Kennedy was a widow, a brave and composed one that nobody could fail to admire. All of them were back in Washington, returning in the same airplane that took them to Texas to an incredible tragedy. And the sheer speed of it was just too fast for the senses. Roosevelt, dead of a stroke, came back here from Warm Springs, Georgia, in a train. The the sides of it draped in black crepe. It steamed majestically across the southern landscape toward Washington, taking a little time about it and giving everybody a time to think a bit about what had happened. But not today. There is seldom any time to think anymore, and today there was none. In about 4 hours, we had gone from President Kennedy in Dallas alive to back in Washington dead, and a new president in his place. There is no more news here tonight, and really no more to say, except that what has happened today has been just too much, too ugly, and too fast.
Oswald's only comment to the world at large since his arrest has been a denial.
Oswald, did you shoot the president? I didn't shoot anybody, sir. I haven't been told what I'm here for. Do you have a lawyer? No, sir, I don't. I just didn't... Go back. You want to go?
So, although he has not yet admitted the shooting, the suspect, Lee Oswald, has been formally charged with murdering President Kennedy. Circumstantial evidence puts him in the room from which the shots were fired. Lab tests are being conducted to prove that he fired the murder rifle. Robert McNeil, NBC News, reporting.
There is no way of calculating the millions of words that have been uttered in the course of this day in all countries of the world as human beings fumble for words to express their offended senses at what has happened in the United States. I seriously doubt that any words uttered by anyone anywhere have succeeded in expressing what you feel yourself. I would suppose that the answer for that is only to be found in the hearts of each of us. This is Frank McGee, NBC News, speaking for Bill Ryan, Chet Huntley, David Brinkley, Herb Kaplow, Peter Hackus, Robert McNeil, and literally hundreds of other technicians and newsmen who have worked throughout the day to bring you this sad story. November the 22nd, into the history books, stamped forever with the blackness of this day's deed. Thank you. Good night.